So I like to go to the casino. We've been to Vegas often enough. You and I know that I like to play the roulette.
Yeah.
And at the roulette, there's always you can bet, you can put your chips on black or red, or on evens and odds, and sometimes people will place their bets because they see it's fallen on the black a lot, so let's put our chips on black because that's how it's rolling, right? Well, the Canadians will be facing the Arizona Coyotes on Tuesday, and they have not won a game in their last 12.
Yeah.
So you could say that you could look at that and say, well, the Canadians, for them to end their own losing streak, is the perfect team because they haven't won in their last 12 games. But the more games they lose, the more dangerous the Coyotes are as an opponent, because at some point, just like in roulette, the law of average is bound to prevail and make them win the game. So that makes the Coyotes, despite their losing streak, dangerous opponents for the Canadians on Tuesday night.
Well, yeah. Okay, sure. I mean, it's danger is open to interpretation, I guess, because the Coyotes are a point behind the Canadians as a result of this massive winless streak. Our friend Pierre LeBrun will be happy that we are using the proper NHL terminology, but really it's a losing streak. They've lost 12 straight games, which has brought them back down. But they are sitting in the 5th slot for the draft lottery at this moment. So yet again, the Canadians find themselves in a situation where both teams would have great interest in losing. Both front offices, let's say, would prefer a loss in this situation. And Kent Hughes at the beginning of the season said that this is not going to be our mindset this year. We don't want to have games where we're hoping to lose, and here they are. Tuesday night, they're in a situation where if Kent Hughes was given truth serum, he would say, yes, I think I'd rather lose this game in regulation.
So basically, Arpin Basu, we're back to the concept of competitive losing that we were discussing on our previous podcast, The Athletic Support.
All last season.
All of last season, it was about competitive losing. It took some time, but that's pretty much where we're at now. Despite the fact that inside the Montreal Canadiens locker room, that's not their mindset at all. And it's especially not Martin St. Louis' mindset. I think that he caught a lot of people by surprise today by saying that despite that losing stretch, he says that the Canadians haven't played in terms of just of execution and,
just performance,
not results, but performance. It's been their best stretch of the season. What do you make of that?
Well, we kind of brought it up on the Friday episode, right? When I mentioned, we mentioned the Canadians' expected goal numbers and how, overall. Yeah. So that kind of goes with that, and I don't think he's wrong. But I don't know if you should be saying that out loud when you're in the middle of a 5-game losing streak, and you shouldn't be saying it in front of cameras, probably. It's okay for Martin St. Louis to think that. I don't know what's being done with that clip today as we speak on February 26th at roughly 3 p.m. But I would imagine that's going to get a lot of play, that a coach of a team having lost 5 straight games in regulation thinks it was the best 5-game stretch of the season for his team. Numbers suggest it is.
A 5-game streak, that's a stretch that started with a 7-4 loss. That's quite something.
Yeah. and a 7-4 loss that came 2 games after a 7-2 loss.
Yeah.
So it's curious, and I think a lot of people react. But if you look at those games, and he's right, and he mentioned it, that there were moments in those games where they lost focus or they weren't as alert, and it cost them some goals and it cost them the game. But by and large, over the course of those games, they played some pretty solid hockey, and I don't disagree with it. I really don't. It's just not something that you say.
So
it's not something that you say when your team has just lost 5 straight games. That's for sure.
For sure. And you know, Martin St. Louis likes to say, "Well, how do you measure success? Cannot just measure success through results." And if you're, you know, he used to say last year, "Well, if I've got a quote in front of me. He said last season, how do you measure success? If you only think you're winning when you're getting the result you want, you get lost in the process a little bit." So there has to be a lot of process going on because in terms of results, the Canadiens are back with pretty much exactly the same point percentage and basically the same level of results and performance that they had last year. So if you want to look at progression, you have to really analyze it from different angles than from that one, because if you just look at progression in the standings and in the win-loss column, there's a certain level of stagnation there.
It's not even stagnant. I mean, they have a worse record after 58 games this year. After 58 games last year, they were at 25, 29, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
What are they at now? They're 22, 28, and 8. So, I mean, it's pretty close, but it's worse.
Okay.
It's hard to call that progress, but it is easy to see progress because they wanted individual progression and collective progression, right? And so I think collectively it's harder to make the argument that there's been massive progression, but when you look at the individual progression, it's easy to see. Now I look at Caden Gooley, and he's playing against top opposition on the right side night after night, and to me, he's the image of progression. You know, I look at him and I feel a lot more confident that he'll be able to be sort of a shutdown, you know, top 4 defenseman, but the guy who gets the difficult minutes and performs well in them, and the guy who teams don't want to face, star players don't want to face. He's turning into that guy. And it's looking more and more likely that he will be that guy. Obviously, we don't have to go into Slafkovsky. That's obvious. Caulfield, Suzuki,
the whole line, deal. The whole first line, the
whole first line. So the fact that they're showing this sort of offensive talent and this ability to, you know, I mean, Slafkovsky had a shift on Saturday. It was just bonkers. I mean, it was nuts. It was, you know, I'm not going to describe the whole thing, but like, you know, basically created 2 really good scoring chances.
Insane passes.
Yeah. And like the first one was 2 great moves right near the blue line in the offensive zone, sent it down to Caulfield, who put it up to Gooley, who fanned on his shot, which led to a breakaway the other way. Slafkovsky was the first man back on that breakaway, hustled to get back. And then a few seconds later, Gooley springs Suzuki on a breakaway, and then Slafkovsky gets in and puts a puck right on his tape. Pretty good defensive play by the Devils to prevent Suzuki from scoring there, but that was a tap-in goal backdoor. So, you know, there's a lot of stories like that. You know, Caulfield's play off the puck, Suzuki just generally becoming more of an offensive threat, and for the first time, it should be said, like finishing the season with actual NHL line mates. You know, I mean, like this time last year, hey, the first line might have been Jesse Alonen, Nick Suzuki, and Raphael Harvey-Pinard. I don't know if it was exactly at this time last year, but at one point it was. That was the first line for the Canadiens last season. So Nick Suzuki is getting a good run with the same line mates and line mates that are at an appropriate level of talent to play with him. And we're seeing the results of that. So good for him. And ultimately, in the grand scheme of things for the Canadiens, like that's the important progression here, is that are the individuals improving? There are individuals who have not, for sure, but it's, you know, when you're trying to build a team, and I think we mentioned it a couple of episodes ago, like you look at the team now and you're like, well, how many of these guys are going to be here when the team is good? Well, the 4 guys I just mentioned will be. They form the core of this team. Others will, just because of contractual situations or what have you, and just because, you know, the Canadiens like them as players, as role players. But to see your core progress the way it has is a good sign for the Canadians, for sure. And so it depends on how you measure success, Marty likes to say. Well, that's, to me, for this season for the Canadians, that's how I would measure success, is that a clearly identified group of players who are going to be part of this team's future are showing that they're worthy of being a part of this team's future.
You started off by talking about goalie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's quite admirable that he's comfortable to play on the right side and does very well doing that. Still, I wonder if, sometimes he's either caught in the offensive zone. There seems to be, I'm not sure if playing with Matheson is really helping him a ton, though, in terms of the way that they understand each other, and that, one guy's questionable decision might put the other one in a bad spot. But I feel like if he was playing with somebody else than Matheson, probably that he would, he would, less risky play. He would fare probably even better.
Yeah, but again, to me, that's kind of not the point. I mean, it's the circumstances of Goulie's season to me are you kind of have to separate them from how he handles them. And yes, I can acknowledge that playing with Matheson can be difficult sometimes. He's unpredictable to both opponents and teammates at times, and it can be difficult to react as a result. But just overall, the way Goulie handles himself in general on the ice against difficult opponents, I remember, last season his first NHL game was against Matthews and Marner. They played Crosby they played the Penguins not long after that.
Yeah.
It was actually, it's 3 games later. So they opened against Toronto. His first 2 home games were against the Maple Leafs and the Penguins. And, from that moment on, I think there were a couple of minutes against the Maple Leafs in the home opener last season where he was a little bit awestruck at what was happening to him. But that quickly went away. So by the time that 4th game came around, or that second home game against Sid, he was past it. And he was just like, okay, I'm an NHL player now, and these are guys that play in the NHL, and I just have to play them, and did really well right off the bat. And so this is a guy who's going to be a tough opponent guy for a long time for the Canadians, and I was talking to him last week, and I had a conversation with him. I asked him if he ever catches himself thinking about the things that we're talking about here, thinking about the future and thinking about what this team will look like. He said that he does. He admitted that he does. He said, I don't want to say you never do. You do sometimes. You think a lot about what can be.
Yeah.
If we just stay on the right track, we know that what we can do and how good we can be in this league. Obviously, he said, but then I quickly kind of snuffed that out. You got to go day by day, blah, blah, blah. But he did end it with, you definitely do think about what can be in the coming years with this group, and it's exciting. And so you do have a sense from all 4 of those guys that they look at each other and see something enticing, and to me, that's progress. That's progress, because I don't think if Nick Suzuki were being honest last season, I don't think he'd be able to give an answer like that. I don't think it was clear what was coming down the pipe and what was happening here, and I don't think he looked around him in the dressing room and couldn't have seen too many guys that he was excited to be with, it's again, he would never say that, but that was just the reality last season. And this season is different in that sense, in that, those 3 guys on the top line can look at each other and say, well, we're going to be playing together, if not on the same line, but as teammates for a long time. And this is exciting. Goulie can look at that and get excited about it. There's definitely
new hook. We can, yeah. You meant new hook. I mean, even Jaden Struble. You're just talking about Caden Goulie, who after 4 games felt as though he felt as though he was part of the NHL. He was an NHL player now. Well, Struble is about to play his 40th game in the NHL. For him now, he's made that jump, and he's an NHL player now. and he's still so young that he really fits in that group of guys that can legitimately say, I'm going to be here for the long term and I'm going to contribute to that team's success.
Yeah.
Jack too. Joshua Roy. There's a few of them, but it remains just half of the team, if that. So that means that there's still a lot of holes, a lot of turnover that's still to be expected. So it's interesting when you if you're the head coach, if you're Martin St. Louis and you're coaching today to implement some stuff and say this is how we want to play. The reality is that he's coaching a group that half of them, when the team is going to be good, they're not going to be there anymore. So
and that's normal. It's normal for where the Canadians are at. But it does kind of beg the question, and I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent, but I think we've talked about obviously a lot the dynamic in the division, the top teams, the bottom teams, how the bottom teams are going to get past the top teams. We're seeing it with Tampa this season, how some chinks in the armor have been obvious over the course of the season. They're finding their way now. But that team's getting older.
Yeah.
Toronto is an imperfect team. Yeah. Thinner. Yeah. Tampa's definitely got much thinner. I mean, their bottom six is not nearly what it used to be. Yeah. Back in the day when Yanni Gordon, Barclay Goodrow, and Blake Coleman were just this perfect bottom six line for them. Like, those days are over. Boston, obviously, no prospects in the pipeline. They've managed on amazing goaltending and strong defense and strong play on the wings to overcome the loss of Bergeron and Krejci. But at some point, that team's going to start to unravel, you would think, at some point. And Florida is just a powerhouse right now, so I don't think they're in this conversation. But because they look like they should be fine for quite a while, even though they got some contracts to deal with this summer that are going to be somewhat difficult. I think you have, just off the top of my head, you have obviously Sam Reinhart, Brandon Montour, Gustav Forsling. I think all three of them are UFA. So, so when we always imagined where the Canadians fit in this, we determined, I think quite fairly, that Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit were ahead of them. And we assumed that Detroit was the least ahead. That the team that the Canadians would have maybe the best chance of catching in a shorter time frame would be Detroit. And you look at what Detroit's doing now, and they're firmly in playoff position right now. Ottawa and Buffalo have both gone off the rails. And if it had just been one of them, I would say, okay, well, that's whatever. Things happen in the season. But they're both built in such similar ways, banking on high draft picks that they've locked up.
You mean Ottawa and Buffalo?
Ottawa and Buffalo, yeah. That they have kind of a similar model to them. To see them both failing at once this season strikes me as something that's worth examining to some extent. Because I don't think any of us, I think both in Ottawa's case and Buffalo's case, I really admired the way they went about it. I thought both those teams kind of compiled the right talent. Actually, this offseason went and tried to surround them with some veteran help. Last year, Ottawa getting Giroux, was a sign that they needed someone to help their young players take a step. Buffalo getting Eric Johnson and, Connor Clifton and these guys to kind of shore up their young defense. But them failing just kind of, and Detroit succeeding makes me wonder, do you think because Detroit's moves have been puzzling to me for the last 2 years. And I don't know anymore. I don't know.
Well, there are hints that the Detroit Red Wings owners are really stomping for presence in the playoffs. They want to see the Red Wings participate in the playoff, and if it's been conveyed to Steve Yzerman, and if there was any sort of pressure that was put on him to have shorter term results, well, then he certainly went about the right way in order to accelerate things and make sure that, you could improve your team in short order. Of course, I mean, adding DeBrincat helped, but generally speaking, it's a team that added some veteran presence, very guys who were pretty much hitting their prime, like Comfer and guys like that. I don't understand all that well what they were trying to do on defense, but it seemed that it has worked. Alex Lyon bailed them out in goal. That's the second year in a row that Alex Lyon bails a team out in net.
Yes.
So with two different teams. So, I mean, I look at that and I'm saying, okay, so yeah, clearly right now the Red Wings are the best team between those three. Does it mean that I would try to emulate what they've been trying to do? No, I would not. And I don't know, maybe the Canadians will say, well, this is the way to go. But I think that the answer lies somewhere between what Detroit did and with what Buffalo did. Because Buffalo, I don't know if it's just a matter of bad mix, like guys that are too similar, or is it because they don't have enough of that veteran leadership, and that Kyle Pozo cannot do everything by himself and pull that much weight in the leadership department, and that you have to have stronger voices. There's been such a turnover of coaches over time. That's also an issue. But I thought that they went the right way about building their team and adding like a ton of high-end talent. So I would, it as frustrating as it may be, and I'm sure that they're going to say something has got to give, I think that you have to look at what you've got and say, well, we've got ingredients of a potential winner here. Ottawa's different because Ottawa doesn't have a lot of youngsters still in the pipeline. What you see is what you get. So they're going to win or lose with the players that they have, and if they want to have different results, they might want to change the mix. But they don't have the Noah Ostlunds, the Savoy, the Rosen.
Yeah. They don't have the Sabres pipeline, yeah.
For sure. So that to me is a big difference. So where do the Canadians stand in the midst of all that? They'll have to find their own recipe, because everybody's being dealt a different hand, and trying to copy the way of another team and trying to copy Buffalo, it's not necessarily a good idea when you consider the number of years that went by without them reaching the playoffs. I mean, they've been bad for 17 years or something. So
yeah, they don't have 2 number 1 overall picks.
No. So I understand there is a comparison because of the fact that the Canadians are rebuilding at the same time as those 3 other teams, but they'll have to find their own solution, man. That's yeah. To me, it's going to be a different path.
I do think the Canadians are going to have an interesting offseason, in the sense that I feel they might not go full Detroit. Like you look at some of their free agent signings, like Steve Yzerman's free agent signings with Detroit. I mean, Comfer, Justin Holl, all on July 1st last season. Klim Kostin, like he was very active on July 1st last year. Like some of these were his own free agents, but I'm counting 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. He signed 11 guys on July 1st last season.
Yeah.
JT Compher, Justin Holl, Klim Kostin, Alex Lyon, Shane Gostisbehere, Daniel Sprong. It's just a lot of activity, and so, the year prior was similar, you got David Perron, Andrew Kopp, Ben Sherratt, David Perron, all on July 13th, 2022. So Dominic Kubalik, Austin Charnick, Oli Mata, like he just went crazy signing free agents. I agree with you that I don't think the Canadians are going to go down that road to that extent, but I do think they're going to go down that road to some extent. Not quite the extent that Detroit did, but I do think that they're going to start looking around the free agent market to start augmenting what they already have this offseason.
Yeah. Okay, well, before the offseason, there's the trade deadline. The Montreal Canadiens are playing on Tuesday night at the Bell Center, their last home game before the trade deadline. After that, next home game will be on March the 9th when they receive the Maple Leafs in Montreal. So with trade deadline looming, we thought at the Basu and Godin Notebook that it would be a good time to maybe do a wrap up of what's potentially on the plate for them, and try to bring a fresh perspective on each of those cases. Because even though the Canadiens traded their best trading chip in Sean Monahan, and things have gone sideways predictably since that happened, there are still more guys to move potentially. Not necessarily all the UFAs, but guys who are still under contract next season. Second year in a
row, by the way, that the Canadian season went sideways after losing Sean Monahan. Two straight years.
That's good. Better hope they don't re-sign him in the summer. So otherwise, so let's go one player after the other. I know that you had something to say about Jake Allen, so I'll let you start with Jake Allen.
What do I have to say about Jake Allen? I remain unconvinced that the Canadiens are going to be able to move him by the deadline. The number of teams that would be interested in Jake Allen is dwindling, in part because their own goaltending has shored itself up. I think of Toronto, Edmonton, Carolina, number of teams that we assumed would be in the market for someone like Jake Allen no longer are in that market. One team that's worth watching here is Colorado. I know that they've been in Montreal a lot. They've had a scouting presence in Montreal quite frequently, and particularly in games that Jake Allen starts. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, because scouts attend NHL hockey games all the time. That's their job, and it's not really a sign of anything. But when a team is consistently there, when they're not usually consistently there, it's noteworthy. So I think that they're keeping an eye on him. But LA, I don't know. There's the number of teams that I think could conceivably make a Jake Allen trade. It's getting lower. And will those teams want to pay the Canadiens to retain money on Jake Allen? Would they be willing to pay that price? That's another question. So there seems to be a lot of difficult moving parts with the Jake Allen situation. His own play being one of them, even though I thought in his last start he was excellent. But
it's certainly not his fault that they lost against New Jersey. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely not.
It was quite good. Yeah,
but it was his first good start in a while. Like he hadn't been playing well up until that point, so he wasn't helping Kent Hughes' situation in that regard. And I think the public messaging that Kent Hughes has done on this, that they're willing to wait to the off season. There's two parts to that. A, he's telling the teams that are asking about Jake Allen that if you don't come up with a price that I feel is appropriate for the retention, let's be clear that if a team said, we'll take Jake Allen's contract off your hands, the price would not be an issue. There would be no issue as to what the Canadiens would ask for. But acquiring Jake Allen and having the Canadiens retain money on him for the rest of this season, but more importantly, next season, will come with a price. So unless he gets that price, I don't think to me, I would think that Jake Allen's not going anywhere. He also has that 7-team no trade list. We don't know who's on that list, but that's a further complicated factor. And I don't think the Canadiens would ask him to waive it. They have a lot of respect for that guy, and I just think there's too many obstacles in the way for a trade to happen. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong many, 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 many times before. So I could be wrong here, but I'd be surprised if he moved by March 8th.
I totally agree with you on that. Totally. And you mentioned that retention slot. It's a topic that maybe some people some listeners might think that we get too technical when we talk about that, but that's a reality. That's really something that's at the heart of the decisions that the Canadiens have to take. It's relevant. It's relevant when it comes to Jake Allen. It's relevant when it comes to David Savard. to Tanner Pearson, and even just to act as a third party, as a broker to make a deal possible. If you want to be the one helping two other teams, trading assets, and you assume some salary, and in exchange you get some sort of draft pick for it. If the Canadiens get more by using their retention slot that way, that's the option that they're going to take.
Well, I mean, that's why that retention slot, in the way you just described, has more trade value than Tanner Pearson does.
Exactly.
Like they would get more. They would get more retaining money in a trade between two other teams than they would by trading Tanner Pearson and retaining half his salary. So, and that the only way they're going to trade Tanner Pearson is by retaining half his salary. So that's the calculation. And frankly, I mean, I don't even know what they would get for Jake Allen if they retained. Like, it might be similar to what they would get for just retaining on another trade. It might be like a third round draft pick, and you could probably get a third round draft pick if you just help facilitate someone else's trade. So yeah, that retention slot's very important. It's worth noting that they have it because they didn't retain money on Sean Monahan, and the reason they only have one is that they're retaining money on Joel Edmondson and Jeff Petrie this season, and they're retaining money on Jeff Petrie next season. So they only have two for next season. So it's an important variable to consider at the trade deadline, because that retention slot is more valuable than some of the players they might be looking to trade.
So another guy that's interesting to me is David Savard, because Savard at this point, I mean, it's the big question for the Canadiens is to say, well, can we afford to lose him now? I.e. being able to replace him every day in the lineup and make sure that his departure does not affect the young defensemen that we have that benefit from having Savard around. Today, Jason Struble was saying, well, if we would probably be better off if everybody was playing the way that Savard is, in terms of, no fear, going out there and just laying it
being engaged.
Yeah. Because everybody recognized that he's got some limitations, but you can never dispute his level of engagement. So, but for the Canadiens, the crux of the matter is, do you get more by trading him this year or next season? And when you look at the market around, of course, Chris Tanev is the best right-handed defenseman that's going to be available on the market. But after that, I mean, Matt Dumba,
who we're going to see tomorrow night, yeah.
Matt Dumba used to be an offensive defenseman, at some point ceased to be, and is reinventing himself as more of a defensive guy. I guess, even though if it was really not his forte when he was drafted, he seems to have a career path that's similar to Roman Amerlik. It's like it's going from one to the other.
Yeah.
But those two guys are the only right-handed shot defensemen that are potentially available that play 20 minutes a night. So that's really David Savard opposition or competition on the market if the Canadiens choose to make him available. After that, I mean, Tyson Barrie, rather a hefty contract, and he's definitely an offensive defenseman and almost a specialist. Eric Johnson, it's debatable how much he's got left in the tank. And you've got Elia.
Well, he's similar to Savard, though.
Yeah,
it's questionable how much Savard has left in the tank too. I mean, I think he's in a similar category to David Savard. Like a team would look at Eric Johnson in the same way that they would look at David Savard, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
The thing, though, the difference between the two is that Savard is available, is signed for another year, whereas Eric Johnson's a UFA at the end of this season. Yeah. But their salary is comparable. So I think that there's an opportunity for Montreal there to, if they choose to strike now and get some value for him now, to probably get better for him this year than they would for next year. I was not always of that mindset, but I think that what comes into play is just by the fact that he's been so reliable, and a team that's looking for a right shot D, whether it's Dallas, whether it's Toronto, or whoever else, he fits the profile of a playoff defenseman. I think that you might not want to risk having him either less performing or injured at the same time next season. But if he goes, then your right side is really shot, because you're down to goalie, who's a left-handed shot playing on the right. Jordan Harris, left-handed shot playing on the right. You got Kovacevic. You might call up Justin Barron. But it becomes a very, very depleted right side of your defense core. And I'm not sure if the Canadiens are ready for that.
No, I think that's the thing, is that, I was talking to, again, Caden Gooley about him last week, and, he mentioned just everything that David Savard brings as a guy, as a man, and as someone who plays on a team with a lot of young defensemen. You mentioned Jaden Struble talking about him today. I mean, every young defenseman on that team, Arbor Jacki, after that game against Buffalo, that big game he had, someone was asked him about playing with Savard. He said, anyone would look good playing with that guy. And it's really interesting to see the reverence that all the young guys have for him, which is why teams would want him. Like, that's, they know that they could take David Savard and put him in their room, and they won't have to worry about the room.
Yeah.
If anything, if the room is a problem, he might help fix it. It's like, that's a strength of his. But like, the Canadiens value that. They'll have young defensemen next year too that could use that. Who knows who's going to be playing in Montreal next season? Lane Hutson could be playing in Montreal next season. David Reinbacher could be playing in Montreal next season. Like, if you're bringing these prize prospects in, having David Savard around, even if you didn't cash in his asset value, would still be bringing you value. And it might not even be on the ice. Like, you're 100% right. And honestly, the situation is very similar to what they had with Joel Edmondson last season. They wanted to trade him before his play on the ice diminished to a point that he became untradeable. And they managed to do that. And you know what? Good on Joel Edmondson. He's stayed relatively healthy this season, and there's a good chance he gets traded again at the trade deadline, which I talked to him about it when Washington was in town, and he wasn't thrilled by that idea. Like, he kind of wanted to not do that. Yeah. But it's, he talked about how Ken Hughes was open with him and just kind of confirmed all the rumors that were floating around. David Savard said much the same thing last week. I asked him if he's had a conversation with Ken Hughes. He said, I have, and he's talked to my agents. And, he said something interesting was that, he said, I'm happy here, and I think that they want me here. So for now, hopefully it stays that way. So that says to me that there was something communicated to him that, yes, we might trade you, but we're not dying to trade you. We'd rather have you. If something comes across our table or our desk that we can't say no to, we're going to have to consider it. But all things being equal, we have enough, and I'm putting words in people's mouths, but the way I would approach is, if you're getting offered a third-round pick for David Savard, there's no point in adding another third-round pick. The only thing being that you'd be freeing up his contract next season. That would be the benefit there, except you're not getting the benefits of having David Savard around your group. And so, but the reality is, and this is the other reason why he might be more valuable now than next season, is that market forces might not be the same next season. So one, you have like Savard's, he's going to be 34, I think, next year. He's not going to get any younger. He's probably not going to improve. He's not going to get any quicker. So there's that. But once Tanev goes, once Dumba goes, and maybe even once Johnson goes, whoever misses out on those guys, and maybe even before that, maybe it's even as soon as Tanev goes, whoever misses out on him, they're going to be looking at David Savard.
Yeah.
And say, is he an option? Like, I know Dallas is considering it. Like, it's definitely something that they're looking into. But, obviously plan A is Chris Tanev, as it is for like 9 other teams. So once that domino falls, and based on these past few trade deadlines, there's going to be time probably between the moment Chris Tanev gets traded and the actual trade deadline, where I would imagine Ken Hughes is going to become a very popular GM.
Yeah.
And then, so if it becomes, but I don't know what the price has to get to where it outweighs the benefit of having Savard around just to help manage this influx of youth that's coming on defense.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack might called him a coach,
Yeah. Well, it's probably a rather high bar because generally speaking, they don't need more draft picks. I'm not sure if Savard would fetch a second round pick. I guess it's always nice to have an extra second round pick. But I think the Canadians, if they could get an actual prospect, they'd be happy. But prospects are always harder to go by because the teams that drafted them, they believe in those guys, and they're just harder to let go. Even though, because they've already started investing some money, establishing where they fit on their depth chart and whatnot. So it's hard to convince a team to move a prospect rather than the pick who's still nameless. But I think the Canadians would probably prefer to have a prospect. But what level of prospect, what level of pick would be enough to say, okay, well, we move on from David Savard? It's not clear that it's going to happen either. So
no, but and again, the retention issue comes up again here. And so, and if a team is asking the Canadians to retain on David Savard for the rest of this year and next season, just as we said with Allen, the price goes up, and I have no idea what happens in that scenario. But even without retention, I would think a second round pick would make Ken Hughes's eyes kind of perk up. But if you're anything third and lower, it's just redundant at this point to add a third round pick. It doesn't weigh the value of having Savard around. It doesn't push the rebuild far enough ahead to say, oh, we got to cash in this asset. This is good asset management. I don't see how another third round pick really helps them compared to how having David Savard around your young defenseman helps them.
But if you retain half of his salary, David Savard at 1.75 for the end of the year next year.
Well, then you have to get a
guy who can play for 20 minutes. It's almost that territory.
Then you have to get a first. I don't think. Well, I wouldn't do it for less than a first if I'm Montreal. I mean, if I'm retaining next year, and I've used my only retention slot left to me until July 1st for this year, and left myself with one next year. If I'm doing that, then yeah, that's got to be a first round pick. And I don't see any team giving up a first round pick to get David Savard. I just don't. But I could be wrong. Again, that might happen. But I would think that would be the starting point for any retained Savard trade. But who knows? We'll see.
How about Jake Evans? Do you think that there could be like a smart team could knock at the Canadians' door and say, that centerman who's still, is still fairly young, makes $1.7 million next season too. We could use him as our, as an excellent fourth line center. Do you think that he's is the sort of guy that could help a contending team and provide value for the Canadians?
I mean, again, I think it's a similar debate to me, is that the value you're bringing in, does it outweigh the value of just having Jake Evans in your lineup from now till the end of the season and even next year? Like, you don't have, like, Jake Evans to me is a bridge to Owen Beck.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice, I think, for the Canadians to be able to have Jake Evans and not feel obligated to rush someone to the NHL to play center. They have signed Brandon Gignac, who's could also kind of serve that purpose, I guess, but is not the same level of player as Jake Evans. But could probably do a lot of the things that he does adequately well enough to provide that. So I think his salary is problematic. It's not a lot, but 1.7 is still not 800,000. It's like it's
for fourth line center on a good team. Yeah, sure.
That's it for a fourth line center on a good team. You kind of need like a million is kind of the cap there, and so I think that weighs into it. But like purely as a player who could be available, he's 27, but he's only played 250 NHL games, so it's not a heavy 27 years old. No. And a guy who can consistently win draws, is a good penalty killer. Like these are guys that are valuable in the playoffs. And so I could see a team asking, but it's that interesting dance where, again, I think we mentioned it on the pod, but like the fact that Ken Hughes said he was glad that he delivered the Sean Monahan trade news by phone because he wouldn't want to be in the same room as Marty to tell him that. This is another case like where it's obviously not the same level, but you're really hampering this year's team. And for the guys who are in it, it's that return better be pretty interesting. And I just don't see them getting an interesting return on Jake Evans. So no, that's my issue.
Any of those guys that we're talking about, and we could include also Jordan Harris that it's been also discussed a little bit. It's also you trade those guys, you get assets in return, but the Canadiens would need to have a clear plan of, okay, with all those assets coming in terms of draft picks, how do we monetize those draft picks after that? Because they've got already so many of them that they don't want to have any more use on the draft floor, but they would need to have a clear picture of how can you convert X number of third-round picks, second-round picks, fifth-round picks, whatever, into something that's concrete that can be impactful for the team next season. Because otherwise, it's just you give away players for lottery tickets, and it would not be part of a real cohesive strategy. So that's why as soon as you leave first round and second round picks territory, it becomes very almost irrelevant,
Yeah, I agree. I agree in principle, but I think Harris is a bit of a different case. I think I could see a lot of teams looking at Jordan Harris and looking at the toolkit and looking at the smarts, like everything, his whole package, just the person that he is, and say, that's someone that I'd like to be part of my plan going forward. Like I'm willing to go out and get that player. I don't, with all due respect to Jake Evans, I don't think anyone's saying that about him. I think people would look at him and be, well, I mean, maybe they would be and say, I see him as being our fourth line center of the future, and he does what he does, and he does it fairly well. Might be a little overpaid, but so what? But Jordan Harris is, he's starting his career, and he's also, making 1.4 million this year and next. So it's not a league minimum, but he is a guy that you could comfortably put on your third pair, can play up on a second pair if need be in a pinch. I could see teams looking at him and being like, okay, if you think he's expendable, like I'm willing to give you something. Like I could see Jordan Harris fetching a prospect in return. Like that's the type of guy.
A team that's lacking defensemen that are ready to play and who have an abundance of forwards. Yeah.
Like Buffalo. Although Buffalo is obviously not going to do it before the deadline, but that's a team that has, or Carolina. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen, but by the deadline, again, like it seems to me like more of an off-season deal if he gets dealt at all.
Yeah.
But the one guy, like deadline-wise, that's really interesting to me is Kovacevic. Jonathan Kovacevic, at his size, right shot. Like we mentioned, all those other right shot D. I wonder if any of those teams, instead of calling about Savard, wind up calling about Jonathan Kovac. All the teams that miss out on Tanev and miss out on Johnson or whatever, whoever, Dumbo, like, and they turn around and instead of coming to the Canadians and say, "Oh, what would you take for David Savard?" Maybe some of them come and say, "Well, what would you need to move Jonathan Kovacevic?"
Because that's at that salary. I mean, it's so easy to slide him under the cap. Yeah, for sure. So like Tampa is looking for, would want certainly to add some defensemen. They don't have a dime to spare.
That's they do now.
They do now because of Sergachev. Yeah, you're right. But I mean, there are teams out there that are squeezed under the cap, and that's the sort of move that they can make. And from the Canadians' perspective, Kovacevic is certainly expendable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you have a replacement sitting in Laval right now, in terms of for the near term. Yeah. So, I think of all the guys that we've talked about, the guy that would surprise me the least if he moved by March 8th would probably be Kovacevic.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And that's because it's just because of the salary. It's because of the salary. It's because
of the market forces. I mean, he's right shot, physical defenseman. He's not experienced. He hasn't won a cup, but he's not particularly young. He's proven reliable in a third pairing role. Like he can do that. And as a seventh defenseman, as for a team going into the playoffs, like as insurance, you could do worse than Jonathan Kovacevic for sure. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you see, I mentioned Ilya Lyubushkin, who's 3 years older than Kovacevic, but 3 years ago that was a similar player. And now he's bounced around from team to team, but there's always interest in that guy. So, including I could see that. Yes. So Kovacevic, I mean, the fact that he's also signed for next year, there are some guys for which being the extra year is a problem, but having an NHL defender at minimum salary, there are teams that will take that they will take the extra room under the cap for next season. They'll devote it to something else than paying for depth on your third pairing or as a 7D. So this is an easy guy to move. The easiest of them for sure. Certainly not the best return that the Canadians could get, but easy guy to move. Okay, let's move to the mailbag because once again this week you guys prevail. We ask you to send us your questions, and it's always I love the reaction. I love the fact that people, they reach out and they write to us, throughout the week on the in the email. It builds up throughout the week, and it seems as though on the Twitter account, it's whenever we remind people that they can't send us their questions, then they all come in bunches. So it's two different dynamics at play, but I like both. That's good. Yeah.
So here, let's start with one from Brian McDougall. This came in on email a few days ago, and I thought it's interesting because of some of the things Martin St. Louis said today. So Brian McDougall asks, does the poor play of Anderson and Gallagher, is it evidence of the limitations of the teaching efforts of Martin St. Louis? Is it possible that the efforts to enrich the hockey sense of some players just won't work, especially for players who traditionally rely on doing only one thing well? Does that mean future drafting, trading, and buying on the free agent market must take account not only of hockey sense, but a player's capacity to learn in the way that Martin St. Louis teaches?
Well, it's funny because I asked Martin St. Louis pretty much. I didn't name those guys today.
No, but you didn't have to.
No,
we all knew who you were talking about,
right? Because the fact is, there are some, since Marty goes after the players' hockey sense, some guys have it more than others, and he said, well, it's some guys are easier to coach in that sense. Some are easier to coach than others, but it doesn't mean you give up on those that you have more trouble reaching out to. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean also that you give an unlimited leash to those that have an easier time integrating your teachings. So he said it's a bit of juggling, but they all learn differently, and you have to find different ways to touch them, basically. So to your point, Brian, I think that even though we could put like Anderson and Gallagher in the same basket because they're probably not the guy with the highest hockey IQs, and they're both north-south guys, I think that there are two different experiments because they're not at the same point in their career. And I think that it would be unfair to put it on Martin Saint-Louis that Gallagher, as a declining asset, as a guy who was once very good, got paid, got rewarded for all the things that he did well with a hefty contract, and now it's way on him because that's part of how he's being perceived. Gallagher's not the Gallagher that he was before, and I'm not sure if there was another coach than Martin Saint-Louis that he would thrive so much better. Anderson, I think that there's probably more of a clash there between what he can provide and what Martin Saint-Louis asks of him. And in that sense, I think that that's really a situation where other teams can look into Josh Anderson and say, okay, if we were to poach him out of Montreal and put him in our situation with our philosophy, our style of play, we think that he could thrive. But to me, those are Anderson, Gallagher, two different situations.
Well, I also think that Gallagher has tried to incorporate some of the things that Martin St. Louis is teaching him, and it's well,
so did Anderson. They both did.
They both did. I think those things have confused Anderson to some extent. Like he doesn't know who to be. I feel, and I think Gallagher's kind of embraced it more, and so, because as you just mentioned, Gallagher's not going anywhere. So I think he kind of realizes, and I don't think Anderson thinks he's going anywhere either, but he is the more movable piece of the two. And but I think the root of the question remains that, do you have to try to identify guys that you think can learn under Marty and can adapt to the way he wants the game to be played? And do you have to go find players basically that suit your coach, as opposed to having your coach adapt to the players he's given? And
yeah,
I think the coach being able to adapt to the players he's given is something that would be ideal from a management perspective. And so I thought that answer today didn't really acknowledge that you need to be a little bit flexible with some players and let them maintain their identity to some extent, and try to work with that identity as opposed to changing it. I think he could stand to do a bit of that in the years to come.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that trading and signing players would probably be done in a way that you try to go get people who will fit in your system and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And if you establish it over a longer period of time, and it becomes the culture, your on ice culture, your on ice identity, well, then whoever you draft, those young players go through your system, they learn that way, and by the time that they're at their peak, they're comfortable with the Canadiens' way of playing. This is far from being a finished product at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's also Randall Keynes asked us on Twitter, if Montreal finishes 5th overall in this year's draft, do you think they will give up assets to try and get the 1st or the 2nd overall? Or would it be better to take the pick and bundle assets for another Kirby Dach trade?
Well, I don't think they're trading up to 1st or 2nd overall. Definitely not 1st.
Nope.
And probably not 2nd either, just because we don't see trades like that anymore. They just don't happen. So there's no point. I mean, you can try. And listen, last year Ken Hughes tried. He talked to pretty much everyone ahead of him in the draft, with the exception of, I think Columbus, and just tried his best to get, and it just wasn't happening. Like the cost to move from 5 to 2 is so astronomically high. Because teams are scared to death to do stuff like that. Like they're just afraid that the player that they choose not to draft will become a super mega star, and the player they wind up getting with the 5th overall pick, no matter what else you got, whether it's a player, whether it's a whole bucket of picks that the Canadiens could easily offer, those bucket of picks, you add them all up, and even that 5th pick, you add it all up, there's a good chance it won't equal the value of that one player that was taken 2nd overall. So, and frankly, if the Canadiens are not moving to 1st this year, they might get the player that they were going to take 2nd in the 5th slot anyway. It's possible.
That's the point I wanted to make, because there's no clear order at the top as to who's going to go 2nd or 3rd. Last year, you knew the top 4 guys, who would they be, and maybe we'll get more clarity between now and the draft. But after Celebrini, I mean, I guess that some team will give a shot at Demidov in the top 5. There's going to be certainly a couple of defensemen being drafted, but even then, which one of them? From one team to another, they're going to have a different defenseman at the top of their list. So it's I don't know.
I mean, the thing is, Demidov could fall to 5. Like, that's the reality of it. He could go 2nd, but he could fall to 5. So if you're giving up a whole bunch of assets to move up to 2nd to get a guy that you could wind up drafting at 5th, then what's the point? I mean, it's and plus, you have to be relatively confident that if Demidov does go in the top 4, that the player you wind up with is still going to be a comparable prospect. So, but just the premise of the question, I would suggest not thinking of moving up that high in the draft, because history has suggested it's just not. Well, first of all, history has suggested that the Canadiens are going to try. So I would imagine they'll try again. I would imagine they'll fail. That's really what that comes down to. And maybe.
How about moving that pick?
Moving that, I definitely think that would be on the table. I mean, listen, we were talking about Zegras a while ago. I think that pick would have to be in play to get him.
Mm-hmm.
That would give Anaheim 2 top 5 picks in this draft. Pretty enticing thing. I definitely think the Canadiens would be open to trading that pick. I don't necessarily think they will, but if they can get creative with it and make an impactful trade that has that pick as its centerpiece, I don't think the Canadiens would hesitate to do it. I really don't. It goes to what I was saying earlier, where I do feel like this offseason is a bit of a tipping point for this organization. They want to, we started this podcast talking about progression. Well, they want to progress. And it's hard not to get the sense that this offseason is going to be one where management tries to force feed that progression a little bit to this organization, to this team. So if that means trading that pick for an established young offensive player, I think that would totally be in the cards, and it would fit the MO that this management team has for this summer.
Totally, that would become their signature move, right? Of doing that 3 years in a row. But it wouldn't make sense, because nobody has done that sort of deal in the past. Certainly not 2 years in a row, and certainly not 3 years in a row. So that would be,
and this would be different. This would be a top 5 pick potentially, and that's. I mean, I don't think the Jets pick is going to get you a whole lot, but having that Jets pick means you're still going to speak on the first night of the draft, you're still going to draft a player. It's not obviously not going to be even close to the quality, but if you can use that first pick to go out and get an established quality player that's less of a lottery ticket, and then still get to draft a player in the first round anyway, I think they would take that.
Yeah, I think that the Jets pick, though, I think that they have a possibility there of trying a home run swing, because there are guys that are very talented that could turn to become very, very good players, but it's just that there are doubts for one reason or another on these guys. But it's not to say necessarily that there's no talent available after 12 or 14. There will be guys. You know, like in 2023, Quentin Musty was drafted 26th overall by the Sharks, and he was considered a talented guy, but someone, you know, there were doubts about this and that. But man, he's been dominant this year in Sudbury, and probably that the Canadiens, if they were willing to give it a shot and try a home run swing in the late 20s, that could be something also that they try to, you know, find this year's Quentin Musty. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. Next question. This comes in from Sean Hayward. Don't know if it's any relation to Brian, but it is Sean Hayward asking a question about goalies. So maybe it is. What do you think of the idea of the Habs giving Primeau and Allen the majority of the starts for the rest of the season? It would give Primeau a chance to truly prove himself, give Allen the potential to increase trade value for the offseason. If they do badly, the Habs get a higher draft pick. If they do well, they become much more valuable than they would have been sitting on the bench. What do you think of that?
It's a very interesting question, but I would not be in favor of that. I think that the Canadiens should play Primeau more, but I would not play Allen more in order to increase his trade value in the offseason at the expense of the guy that you pretty much identify as your number one goalie. I think that you have to continue riding Montembeault, develop him, get him into a rhythm, let him see a maximum of reps, even though it's in a losing season. I think that you have to continue to invest in the players that you believe in, and that you have to show those players that you believe in them. And I don't think that I think that you risk more by not playing Montembeault and breaking totally his rhythm than the marginal gains that you could make by playing Allen more often and hoping that you'd get a little bit more on the trade market in the summer than what you would get now. And that's, if you're sure to lose by not playing Montembeault, you're sure to give him a disservice, but you're not sure of the gain that you would make by playing Allen more. So I think if you look at in a mentality of looking in the horizon, saying, well, these are the guys that I'm going to count on, well, then play Montembeault, play Primeau, and you'll get what you get for Allen, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I do feel that they should play Primeau and Allen more, not for the reasons that Sean described. I'm with you on that, but I think they need to find Primeau more games. That's really what it comes down to for me. Like it's you got to collect more information on this guy. And I remember saying the exact same thing about Sam Montembeault 2 years ago, you know, or actually even last year. I mean, last year was, you know, we need to see Kirby Dach at center, and we need to see Sam Montembeault in net to know what you have there in both cases. Yeah. And in this case, so now the Canadiens think they know what they have in Sam Montembeault, and I think he's shown that. They need to collect that same information on Caden Primeau, and you can't have a season, you know, at this point, the Canadian season is about collecting information about a whole bunch of players. You know, they're collecting information right now on Joshua Roy. I would imagine they're enjoying the information they're receiving. You know, it's a good sign that how he's performed and how he's playing and how he's able to play with good players. And we always knew this about Joshua Roy, that he's a guy who can he played wing with Connor Bedard at the World Junior Championships. Like it's a quality that he has. But the Canadiens are seeing it, and now they're better learning how to best use that in the future. It's a bit of an apples and oranges thing, but I do think that they need to collect information on Allen and Primeau, and they haven't gotten enough of it this year. What they've gotten has been good. He's shown mental fortitude. He's shown work ethic, dedication to improving. He's been very coachable. His attitude has been great, even though he does not like this situation one bit. Not one bit. He has not been a problem for them, but I don't know how long that's going to last. Like, I think, you need to get him into some games and you need to play him. But I don't think you should sit Montembeault for the rest of the season. That would be pretty counterproductive to a lot of things. So I don't know how you manage that, but there's one guy who would sit, it'd probably be Allen of the three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Speaking of goalies, the Gargle is asking us, with Allen on the way out, Jakob Dobesch in the AHL, how do they timeline Fowler, Quentin Miller, and Volokin with Dobesch and Montembeault-Primeau? So that's an interesting one. I think that they have a luxury of letting those guys develop for quite a while. We've seen with Montembeault that goalies take longer to develop. We're seeing it also with Primeau. So I think that the lesson here would be to benefit of the fact that, especially Fowler and Volokin, who are in situations where they can stay where they are for quite a bit, there will be no rush to bring either of them in the pros in the American League. But I think the one lesson that's being shown in Laval this year is that if you are to give the reins to a young goaltender, make sure that you have a veteran by his side as a backup, because Kaskisuo helped Dobesch turn his season around, and there was a level of comfort that Dobesch seemed to gain as soon as the other one came in. So it might not be Kaskisuo next season, but they need to have an older goalie, probably a more experienced goalie for the next little while. So when Quentin Miller is ready to graduate, which will be pretty much at the same time as Fowler, they'll have to make a decision. And, I don't know if it means moving Miller, it means starting him in Trois-Rivières. There's nothing bad with having a goalie start in the ECHL. It's not the same label as for a skater. A lot of goalies at some point, because of a logjam that's really just organizational, spend their beginnings at the ECHL level and climbed up the ladder. I saw Sebastian Cossa, who's been named like the goalie of the week in the American League. He started off in the ECHL and it didn't look really good at some point for the former Red Wings first round pick. So, I mean, there's plenty of time for both Fowler and Volokin. So I guess Volokin, they can leave him in Russia for quite a bit.
Well, I mean, I remember when we looked into it, when I looked into it recently, I mean, the average time from when you draft a goalie, like, you're looking at 5 years before you can reasonably expect that goalie to be in the NHL. So there's time for both the guys that was mentioned in that question.
So I think that when it comes to NCAA, though, and it's a good example with Lane Hutson, and we could segue with a Hutson question after that, but there's always this, when you have a very highly performing player in the NCAA, you have to find the right understanding with your prospect that beyond the second year, if he is to do a third year in the NCAA, are you putting him on a path where you're giving him the option where eventually he'll say, might as well do my 4 years and become a free agent after that? For some prospects, you don't want to take that chance. You don't want to even let the kid contemplate that possibility. So Fowler, who's been very, very good this season as a freshman at Boston College, will most likely go back for a second year. But after that second year, it'll be interesting to see. Okay, is he the sort of guy that's just comfortable spending no matter how many years is needed to be an effective goalie in the NHL, and he'll develop at Boston College? Or will he be the sort of guy who'll say, yeah, I could, after 4 years, I could choose my own destination. So I don't want to give any, suggest any intention that Fowler might have, but it's just the sort of thing that when you have a development staff, guys like Rob Ramage, Francis Bouillon, and also the guys who are in charge of the goalies like Vincent Riendeau, they have to, over time, stay in touch with the goalie, stay in touch with his agent or his family advisor when it comes to an NCAA kid, and just have a sense of where's his mindset, and just make sure that the relationship is free-flowing, there's good communication, so that in the event that the guy spends a third year or even a fourth, that there's no risk at the end of the road.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But these guys are far away, regardless of whether Fowler leaves after. Yeah. They're all very
even
far
away.
Away.
Even Dobish is far away.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's why, the 3-year contract that Montembeault signed, obviously, which kicks in next season, that my first inkling of it was that's a bridge to one of these guys, but it's probably not. He's probably going to have to sign another contract, or they're going to bring in another. Maybe Dobesh at that time might be ready, or Primeau.
At the end of Montembeault's, yes.
Or Primeau would be ready to take over the job at that point. But the guys, the Fowler, Volokin, Miller, even after those 3 years, they probably won't be NHL ready. If past history with goaltenders is any indication. And you mentioned Kosa, Jesper Wallstedt, same kind of deal, was highly touted first round pick, Minnesota Wild, is still in the AHL, a few years later. And so it takes time for goalies, Wallstedt's only 21.
Askarov is only starting to show glimpses of his promise at the NHL level. So it does take a long time.
It takes a long time, and those are all first round picks. Askarov, Wallstedt, Kosa. Jacob Fowler should have been picked before the Canadiens got him in the 3rd round, but remains not that level of prospect. Even though he's playing extremely well and shows a lot of promise as a goaltender. And I'm not saying that you have to be picked in the 1st round to be a hotshot goalie prospect, but there's a reason those guys were picked in the 1st round.
Yeah.
And there's a reason Fowler wasn't.
And who knows if within the organization some might value Volokin more than Fowler.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Okay, I am David Reinbacher's burner account. I am once again asking about the possibility of seeing Lane Hutson in Montreal and David Reinbacher in Laval this year. Okay, well,
all right. Well, I talked to Jeff Fool about this on Friday. Actually, Reinbacher being in Laval. It's interesting. Laval last season had a similar thing with Emil Heineman arriving right around this time. He proceeded to score 7 goals in his first 7 games. Actually helped Laval in their push towards the playoffs. With Reinbacher, here's the situation with David Reinbacher is that Cloton is pretty much guaranteed to finish second to last in the Swiss National League. If there are 2 teams in the second tier league, which is called the Swiss League, which can be very confusing. So let's just call it the second tier league. There are 2 teams who have applied for promotion into the National League. And those 2 teams have each reached the semifinals of that second tier league. So if one of those teams, the teams being Viege and Olten, if one of those teams were to win the Swiss League, which is the second division Swiss professional league, if one of those teams were to win and their applications for promotion were accepted by the National League, then Cloton would have to play this playout series with HC Ajoie, I think they're called. And so in that case, what I've been told is the Canadiens would feel uncomfortable asking Reinbacher to leave if he has to play that series. So which would delay his arrival by 2 weeks, essentially. So at some point, their closing season ends next week, if I'm not mistaken, or the first week of March.
March 4th.
March 4th, or something like that. Mm-hmm. So if they have to play that playout series, that takes you into mid-March, at which point there's still a decent amount of runway in the Rocket season for him to come back and join the team in Laval, which is what I think the Canadiens would like him to do, which is what he himself is open to doing. So that's the situation. So eventually it's going to happen, basically, long story short. Hudson's a bit.
Do you think that they would need to paper him though? Right? They would need to paper Reinbacher in the event that the Rocket makes a push.
No, would he not sign? For him to play in the playoffs? You mean?
Yeah. I mean, in the event.
No, I don't think so. Because wouldn't they just sign him to an ATO?
That's probably what they would do.
Yeah, I think they would sign him to an ATO, and then I think he would be able to play in the playoffs in that instance, if I'm not mistaken. But I should probably check on that. But I believe
different story with Lane Hutson though, because Lane Hutson doesn't have a contract that's already signed. So, because Reinbacher has a contract, he can go sideways by signing an ATO. We've seen that before. But Lane Hudson's going to want to. He's going to want to burn a. He's going to burn a year of his contract. Yeah.
So
that's it. So when it comes to Hutson, I think we mentioned it in the past episode that it's tied to the Frozen Four. The finals of Frozen Four is April 11th and 13th. So in the event that Boston University goes there and makes it to the Final Four, then Hutson will be pretty much out of runway to play games with the Canadiens. It might be the last game, maybe something like that. So,
which we've seen before. I think Charlie Lindgren did that. Did he not? Or it wasn't the last game. Who played in the last game? Paling.
Ryan Paling, St. Cloud.
Ryan Paling played in the last game of the season. That's the night he scored 4 goals. Well, 3 goals and a shootout goal.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. That was right after, and St. Cloud had been, they'd been eliminated in the semifinal of the Frozen Four.
Right. Yeah. But we've seen it before. Basically, Paling played that game to burn the first year of his entry-level contract, which is surely what Hudson's people would insist that the Canadiens do. It's become pretty much standard for college players leaving school after the season to burn that first year right away. So I would not be shocked. Actually, I would be shocked if Lane Hutson did not play a game for Montreal this season. That would be shocking to me.
Where is he going to play next year, I think? That's another question that Hugo Twig was asking us. Where do you think he's going to play next season? I think I give him more of a... I
think he'll start the year in Laval.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Ultimately, I think that he's got more of a chance to play in Montreal, play more games in Montreal next year than Reinbacher.
Oh, yeah? You think so? Yeah, maybe.
Well, there's a part of Reinbacher's play that's probably rounded and makes him a bit safer.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll also want to test to see if Hutson can, how can he defend, facing NHL guys? Because the offense will be there. I'm sure that the offense will pop and be immediately visible, but how is he going to manage against that strong competition at the NHL level? They'll want to see that too.
The one thing about this organization that we've seen demonstrated this year is that they strongly believe that players can go to the AHL and learn how to defend there. Arbor Jacki was sent there to do that. Justin Barron has currently been sent there to do that. So I have no doubt that they will want both Hutson and Reinbacher to go learn how to defend in the AHL. My feeling is that Hutson will be fine and he'll show an ability to do that, but I think Reinbacher's defensive game is so polished that he's going to demonstrate that pretty quickly in Laval. Yeah. Doesn't mean that they'll pull him out of there, but I don't think the issue with Reinbacher, I think Marty's answer on Caden Gooley today, how he'd rather have a young defenseman who takes care of his own end and they have to work on his ability to play in the offensive zone. That's exactly. He'd rather have that than that's David Reinbacher. That's exactly what they have in him. They need to work on his game in the offensive zone, but a game in his end is pretty damn sound. So I would think if they
but there's an adjustment in terms of size of rinks, size of ice sheets.
Absolutely.
So that's going to the smaller ice rink is going to make it's going to be an adjustment for him.
But even in a month from like the start of rookie camp to the time he played against the Devils in the preseason and was sent to Switzerland, in that span, he showed incredible adjustment to the size of the ice. Mm-hmm. I remember watching him in the rookie tournament in Buffalo on more than one occasion, him skating full speed into the glass. Like literally not realizing the boards were going to be there because in his mind, he has the muscle memory is so down that I have X number of strides from the net to the corner and that he was one stride short, right? And so it's like it happened more than once. I remember thinking, okay, I've never actually seen that, but that's literally a guy getting used to the size of the rink. And by the time he played the Devils, it was as if he'd been playing on small rinks like his whole life. Like it was much improved. Like it was very much improved. So it didn't take long for him. So we'll see. But I think they'll both start in Laval, but I disagree with you in that I think Reinbacher will play more games in Montreal than Hutson.
Well, I'm not going to bet a beer on that because I haven't gotten my beer from earlier in the year yet. So,
hey man, you bailed on Friday night. We were supposed to go for a beer on Friday night. You even said it on the podcast, and you bailed. So
I did. Yeah. All right, folks, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for sending us your questions. It's much appreciated. As usual, you can send them to Basu and Godin. That's our Twitter handle, and also by email at basuandgodin@gmail.com. We'll be back on Friday. By that time, Arpin, you will be on the road because the Canadians will be in Florida. We'll come and join you in Nashville, where there will be more than one beer going on, that's for sure. And that's it. In the meantime, everybody, enjoy your week. And you too, Arpin.
All right. Talk to you Friday, everyone.